They came from the sea. That is how the story begins in every telling. The strangers, the bearded ones, the ones who rode animals we had no name for and wore metal that caught the sun and threw it back in blinding sheets. They came from the sea. But that is not how my story begins. My story begins with flowers. My name is Xochitl. It means flower. My mother named me that because I was born in the month of the sweeping, in the season when the marigolds were thickest along the causeways. And my mother believed that the world names you before your parents do. That the first thing the world shows you when you arrive is who you are meant to be. The first thing the world showed me was flowers. So I became flowers. I was a flower seller in the great market of Tlatelolco. I want you to understand what that means. Not a poor woman sitting in the dirt with a handful of wilted blossoms. A flower seller in Tlatelolco, in the greatest market in the world. I say that without boasting. I say it because it was true. The men who came from across the sea, the ones who would later destroy everything I loved, even they said it. Even they stood at the edge of our market with their metal hats in their hands and their mouths open and said they had never seen anything like it. Not in their own lands, not anywhere. 60,000 people in the market on a normal day. 60,000. Buying and selling and arguing and laughing and tasting and touching and smelling and living. Every kind of thing you can imagine and many you cannot. Cocoa and cotton and jade and obsidian and feathers. Feathers of every color. The green of the quetzal, the red of the macaw, the blue of the cotinga, and pottery and sandals, and tobacco, and rubber and slaves, and gold and silver and food. So much food, more food, than any city in the world had ever gathered in one place. And flowers, my flowers. I grew them in the chinampas, the floating gardens on the lake, the gardens my family had tended for 3 generations. Gardens built on mats of woven reeds in lake mud, anchored by willow roots, floating on the surface of Lake Texcoco like green rafts. The soil was rich, the water was constant, the sun was generous, and the flowers grew, marigolds, dahlias, orchids, the deep red blooms we called Xochitl that smelled like vanilla and opened only in the morning. The white ones we called Xochitl that we use for the temples, for the gods, for the ceremonies where the priest stood at the top of the pyramid and held the flowers up to the sun, and the flowers caught the light, and for one moment, the whole temple was made of light. I grew these things with my hands. I carried them to market on my back. I sold them to mothers and priests and lovers and warriors and old women who put them on the altars in their houses and spoke to the dead through the petals. That was my life, a life of flowers, in a city on the water, in a world that had not yet learned the word conquistador. I need to tell you about the city, because you do not know it. You cannot know it. It does not exist anymore. It was dismantled, stone by stone, canal by canal, flower by flower, and a new city was built on top of it. And the new city does not remember the old one, and the old one has become a thing that lives only in the mouths of the very old and the pages of the very careful. But I remember. Tenochtitlan was built on water, not beside water, not near water, on water, an island in the center of a lake in the center of a valley in the center of mountains in the center of the world. That is where we were, the center of the center of the center. The city rose out of the lake like a dream, like something the gods had imagined and then, being gods, had simply made real. White stone, blue water, green gardens, the causeways stretching from the island to the shore like arms reaching for the land, 3 of them, straight as arrows, wide enough for 10 men to walk abreast. And everywhere, the canals. Canals instead of streets, water instead of roads, canoes instead of carts. The city moved by water. The city breathed by water. The city was water. I grew up on the water. I slept on the water. My chinampa floated on the water. When the wind came off the mountains at night and the lake shifted, the garden shifted with it, and you could feel it. A gentle rocking, a slow sway, like being held in the arms of something enormous and patient. I loved the water. I loved the way the morning sun hit the lake and turned it into a sheet of gold. I loved the sound of the canoes, the soft dip of paddles, the whisper of hulls through water. I loved the smell of the lake in the evening, wet earth and fish, and the faint sweetness of the water lilies that grew along the edges. The city had 200,000 people. 200,000. More than any city in Europe. More than London. More than Paris. More than the Spanish cities the strangers had come from. Though we did not know that then. We did not know about their cities. We did not know about their world. We knew about ours, and ours was enough. The mornings. I want to tell you about the mornings, because the mornings were when the city was most itself. I woke before dawn, every morning. A flower seller's day starts in the dark, the way a baker's does, because flowers must be cut when the dew is still on them, when the petals are heavy with moisture, and the stems are firm, and the color is deepest. I took the canoe, my canoe, a small boat made of cypress wood, carved by Itzcoatl's father before I was born. It sat low in the water and moved through the canals without sound. And in the darkness before dawn, the only thing I could hear was the dip of my paddle and the soft collision of the hull against the water lilies that grew along the edges. The chinampas were a short paddle from our house. 5 minutes, maybe less. The gardens appeared out of the dark like green islands, and I pulled the canoe alongside and stepped out onto the soft mud and knelt among my flowers. The cutting was a ceremony. Not a ceremony with priests and drums, a private ceremony, a ceremony of the hands. You hold the stem between your fingers. You feel for the joint, the place where the stem wants to break, and you cut, cleanly, quickly, one motion, the way a surgeon cuts, the way Itzcoatl cut stone, with respect for the material, with an understanding that the thing you are cutting is alive and deserves a clean ending. I cut the marigolds first, then the dahlias, then the orchids. I laid them in the canoe in rows, stems together, blossoms fanning outward, until the canoe was full, and the water around it was full of petals that had fallen during the cutting, and the petals floated on the dark water like small golden boats. And then I paddled to the market, through the canals, past the houses, still dark, still sleeping, past the temples where the first priests were beginning the morning chants, their voices rising in the cool air like smoke, past the great aqueduct that carried fresh water from the springs of Chapultepec, the water flowing through clay pipes, singing as it flowed, a constant, reliable, beautiful sound, the sound of a city being kept alive by water. I arrived at the market as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, and the market opened, and the noise began, and the day started, and the flowers sold, and the world turned, and none of us knew it was turning for the last time. I should tell you about Atlacoya at the market. She came with me sometimes, on the days when she did not have weaving to do, or when the weaving was done and the afternoon was long and the sun was hot, and a girl of 11 had nothing to do but follow her mother and learn. She loved the market, not for the flowers. She saw flowers every day. She was bored of flowers the way a fisherman's daughter is bored of fish. She loved the feathers. The feather sellers had a section of the market to themselves, and their stalls were like aviaries, not of birds, but of the things birds leave behind. Feathers of every color and size, arranged in heaps and bundles and fans. And the light came through the feather sellers' canopies, and the feathers caught it and threw it back in greens and reds and blues, so vivid they did not look real. Atlacoya would stand in front of the feather sellers and stare. She would reach out one finger, carefully, slowly, as though the feathers might fly away, and she would touch, just touch, the tip of her finger on the edge of a quetzal plume, and her face would change, the way Vasia's face changed when the baby kicked, the way Cheyenne's face changed when he first saw the Titanic. A change that came from somewhere deep, somewhere below the words, somewhere in the place where wonder lives before language finds it. She was 11. She touched feathers, and the touching was a kind of prayer. The great temple stood at the center. The Templo Mayor, twin pyramids, one for Tlaloc, the rain god, one for Huitzilopochtli, the sun god, the war god, the hummingbird of the south. I saw the temple every day of my life, from my Shinampa, from the market, from the causeways. It was the thing you saw first and last, the thing that oriented you, the thing that told you where you were in the world. It was the center. And when you are the center, you do not imagine that the center can move. You do not imagine that the center can fall. I was 34 years old when the strangers came. I had a husband, Itzcoatl, a mason, a man who shaped stone the way I shaped gardens, with patience, with skill, with the quiet pride of someone who knows that the thing he is building will outlast him. He had built walls. He had built steps. He had carved the stone serpents at the base of the temple platform. And when the light hit them right, the serpents seemed to move, seemed to breathe, and people would stop and stare. And Itzcoatl would stand nearby and watch them stare and say nothing, because a mason does not boast. A mason lets the stone speak. We had 2 children, a son, Cuautli, Eagle, who was 15 and already training as a warrior, and a daughter, Atlacoya, she who makes the water sad. A strange name for a girl, but my mother chose it. And my mother was a woman who believed that sadness was not a weakness, but a kind of seeing. The ones who see clearly, my mother said, are the ones who cry. Atlacoya was 11. She had my face in her father's hands, broad, strong, the hands of a builder, though she used them for weaving. She wove cotton cloth on a backstrap loom, and the patterns she made were so fine that the women in the market would hold them up to the light and shake their heads and say, "How does a child make this?" And Atlacoya would look at the ground and say nothing, because she was like her father. She let the cloth speak. We had a life, a good life, a life of flowers and stone and cotton and water, a life that the world had not yet finished with. The strangers arrived in the year 1 reed. I will not tell you their names. Their names are in every book already. Their names are the names that swallowed ours. Their names are famous, and ours are forgotten, and I will not add to the imbalance by saying them again. I will call them what we called them, the strangers, the bearded ones. the ones who came from the sea. I did not see them at first. I heard about them. Everyone heard. The way you hear about weather coming over the mountains, a rumor, a change in the air. Men from the coast had come to the capital with stories, strange stories. Stories about floating mountains that moved on the water. Ships, the strangers called them. But we did not know that word. And the runners who brought the news described them as mountains. Because what else do you call a thing that large that floats? Stories about men with hair on their faces, like animals. Men with pale skin, like something that had been kept out of the sun too long. Men who wore metal. Who rode beasts with 4 legs and hooves that struck sparks on the stone. Horses, the strangers called them, but we did not know that word either, and the runners described them as deer, giant deer, with men growing out of their backs. Stories about a weapon that made thunder, that threw a ball of metal that could kill a man from 100 paces, that could punch through a shield of wood and cotton and keep going. Stories. We listened to the stories the way you listen to stories about distant lands, with interest, with fascination, with the comfortable certainty that distant lands are distant. They were not distant. They were coming. Moctezuma let them in. I will never understand this. I have thought about it every day for how long now? How many years since the year 1 read? I have lost count. The counting does not matter. The question matters. Why did he let them in? He was the Tlatoani, the speaker, the ruler, the man who held the world in his hand the way a man holds a cup. He had armies. He had warriors. He had the greatest city on earth at his back and the causeways in front of him. Causeways that could be broken, that could be dismantled, that could be turned from bridges into moats with a single order. And he let them in. He let the strangers walk across the causeway, into the city, into the center, into the heart. Some say he believed they were gods, that the old prophecy of the feathered serpent returning from the east had come true, that the strangers were not strangers, but the fulfillment of a promise made by the world itself. I do not know if that is true. I know what I saw. I saw the strangers walk into the market of Tlatelolco. I saw their faces. I saw the way they looked at the piles of gold and jade and feathers and food. I saw the hunger in their eyes. Not the hunger of men who are starving, the hunger of men who are counting. Their eyes moved across the market the way a merchant's eyes move across a storeroom, measuring, calculating, pricing. They were not looking at our city the way visitors look at a wonder. They were looking at it the way a man looks at a thing he intends to take. They stayed in the city for months, as guests, as visitors, as something between guests and prisoners, and gods and conquerors, that had no name in our language because our language had never needed such a word. Moctezuma housed them in the palace of Axayacatl. He gave them gold. He gave them food. He gave them feathered cloaks and jade necklaces and women and everything a host gives a guest in a world where hospitality is law. And they took it all. And they wanted more. They always wanted more. That was the thing about the strangers. The thing I noticed from the market, watching them walk through the stalls with their counting eyes. They had no concept of enough. In our world, a man could be rich or poor, but there was a limit. There was a point at which a man said, I have what I need. My house is full. My family is fed. My gods are honored. I am content. The strangers did not have that point. They had a hunger that was not for food, a thirst that was not for water, a wanting that was bottomless, that could swallow gold the way the lake swallowed rain and never be full. I watched them and I thought, these are not gods. Gods are satisfied. Gods have what they want. These men are never satisfied. These men will never have what they want. These men are something else. The massacre happened at the festival of Tenochtitlan, our most sacred celebration, the feast of the rain and the feast of the sun, the ceremony with the drums and the dancers and the flowers, Mayflowers, the best flowers, the ones I saved all year. The dancers were in the courtyard of the great temple, hundreds of them, dressed in feathers and gold. The drums were beating, the chanting was rising, the air was thick with copal incense and the smell of marigolds, and the strangers closed the gates, and they drew their swords, and they killed. I was not in the courtyard. I was at the edge of the market, selling the last of my flowers to women who were hurrying to the festival. I heard the screaming before I understood it. The screaming rose above the drums, the way smoke rises above fire. And for one moment, the two sounds, the drums and the screaming, were mixed together, and you could not tell which was which. And then the drums stopped. And there was only the screaming. I dropped my flowers. I ran toward the sound. And then I stopped running, because the crowd that was running towards me was larger than me, faster than me, and the crowd carried me backward, the way a river carries a leaf. People were streaming out of the temple precinct. Their faces, I cannot describe their faces. The face of a person who has just watched something they cannot process. Something that does not fit inside the head. Something that the mind refuses to hold, the way the stomach refuses poison. A woman fell beside me. She was bleeding from the arm. A long cut, deep, the kind of cut that metal makes, clean and straight and terrible. I helped her up. She said, "They are killing everyone in the courtyard, the dancers, the priests, everyone." I said, "Why?" She looked at me. She did not have an answer. There was no answer. There is still no answer. After the massacre, the city rose. Not slowly, not with deliberation. The city rose the way a man rises when he has been hit, and his blood is up, and his mind has gone past thought into something older, something that lives in the muscles and the jaw, and the clenched fists. The people of Tenochtitlan rose. They surrounded the palace where the strangers were staying. They cut the causeways. They rained stones and arrows and fire on the walls. They screamed for blood. The blood of the men who had killed the dancers, who had killed the priests, who had killed the sacred ceremony. And the strangers fled. In the night, over the western causeway, in the rain, carrying what they could, the gold, always the gold, the bars and the chains and the ornaments they had melted down, so heavy that some of them fell off the causeway into the water, and the gold dragged them down, and the lake swallowed them. The night of sorrows, the strangers called it. We did not call it that. We did not call it anything. We were too busy burying our dead. But they came back. They always come back. That is the thing about men with metal and thunder and the hunger that has no bottom. They come back. They lick their wounds and they count their dead. And they sharpen their swords and they come back. They came back with more men and with our enemies and with the sickness that traveled ahead of them like a scout. The sickness that entered the city before the army did and opened the gates from the inside. The sickness came first, before the siege, before the strangers came back with their army, before the causeways were cut and the water was poisoned and the city was surrounded. The sickness came. It came silently, invisibly. on the breath of the strangers, in the cloth of the strangers, in the air that the strangers had breathed and that we breathed after them. We had no name for it. We had no word. We had never seen it before. It did not exist in our world. It came from their world, the world across the sea, the world of floating mountains and giant deer and men with hair on their faces. It came, and it killed. The spots appeared first, on the face, on the chest, on the arms, small red spots that grew larger and darker and filled with something that was not blood and not water, but something between. The spots covered the body. They covered the face until the face was no longer a face but a map of suffering. And then the fever, the shaking, the thirst that could not be satisfied no matter how much water you drank, the weakness that began in the legs and moved upward, as though the body were a house and someone were closing the doors one by one, starting at the bottom. People died in their homes, in the streets, in the market, in the temples. They died so fast that the living could not bury them. They died so many that the canals filled with bodies, and the water that had been our life became our grave. Half the city died of the sickness before the strangers even returned. Half. I need you to hold that number, the way I needed you to hold Fumiko's number, the way I needed you to hold Natasha's hours. Half. 100,000 people. Gone. Before the siege began. Before the first arrow. Before the first thunder weapon. The sickness did what the army could not. It opened the door. Its Kotal got sick. My husband. My mason. The man who carved stone serpents that seemed to breathe. The spots appeared on his arms first. I saw them in the morning light. Small. Red. Like drops of paint on stone. He looked at them. He looked at me. He did not say anything. He did not need to. We had both seen what the spots meant. We had seen it on the faces of our neighbors, on the faces of the priests, on the face of the woman who sold cocoa beside me in the market, who had been there every day for 10 years, whose voice calling cacao. Cacao had been as much a part of the morning as the sun. She was dead now, and the silence where her voice had been was the loudest sound in the market. I tended him. I brought him water. I bathed the spots with cloth soaked in herbs. The herbs my grandmother had taught me, the herbs we use for fevers and wounds, and the 100 small illnesses of ordinary life. The herbs did not work. Nothing worked, because this was not an ordinary illness. This was a new thing, a thing from another world, a thing our bodies had never met, the way our eyes had never met horses and our ears had never met thunder weapons. We were new to it, and it was merciless with new things. He died on the 6th day, in our house, on the mat where we had slept for 15 years, with his hands at his sides, the hands that had carved stone, the hands that had built walls, the hands that had held our children when they were small enough to hold. I washed him. I dressed him. I wrapped him in the cloth that Atlacoya had woven, the finest cloth, the one with the pattern so fine that women held it up to the light and shook their heads. I wrapped my husband in my daughter's weaving, and I buried him, not in the ground. There was no room in the ground anymore. The dead had filled the ground. I put him in the canoe, and I took him to the edge of the lake, and I gave him to the water that had rocked us to sleep, the water that had fed the Chinampas, the water that had been the blood of the city. I gave him to the water, and the water took him, and the canoe came back empty. The siege began in the month of the precious feathers. May, the strangers called it. We called it Toxcatl. They came with their army, and with our enemies, the Tlaxcalans, the Texcocans, the cities we had conquered and ruled and taxed and bled, the cities that hated us, the cities that had been waiting for this moment, the way a wound waits to be opened. They came together, the strangers and the others, thousands of them, tens of thousands. They surrounded the city. They cut the causeways. They broke the aqueducts. The aqueducts. That is the thing that killed us before the swords did. The aqueducts brought fresh water from the springs on the mainland. Without the aqueducts, we had only the lake. And the lake was salt, brackish, undrinkable. They cut the water, and the city began to die of thirst. I will not give you the days in order. I cannot. The siege lasted 80 days. 80 days of fighting and dying and thirsting and starving and praying and holding the walls and losing the walls and taking them back and losing them again. I will give you what I can carry, what I can hand you without dropping. The causeways. The causeways were the battleground. The 3 long stone roads that connected the island to the shore. The arms of the city, reaching for the land. The strangers wanted the causeways because the causeways were the way in. We wanted the causeways because the causeways were the only way out. Every day, the fighting was on the causeways. Every day, our warriors went out in the morning, faces painted, shields raised, the obsidian blades of their swords catching the light. And every day they came back with fewer. The metal. That was the difference. Our weapons were beautiful. Our weapons were art. An obsidian sword is a thing of terrible beauty. The volcanic glass napped to an edge sharper than any metal, set in a wooden paddle, capable of cutting through flesh and bone with a single stroke. But obsidian shatters. Against metal, it shatters. A metal sword meets an obsidian blade, and the obsidian breaks, and the warrior holding it is suddenly holding a stick, and the man in front of him is still holding a sword. That is the mathematics of conquest. Obsidian against steel, stone age against iron age, beauty against endurance. Beauty loses. Beauty always loses. The canals became weapons, both theirs and ours. We knew the canals. We had been born on the canals. We could navigate them in darkness, by touch, by the taste of the water, by the sound of the current against the stone walls of the houses. The strangers did not know the canals. They were landmen, horsemen, men of roads and fields and dry earth. The water confused them. The canals confused them. The city that moved by water, that breathed by water, that was water. The city confused them the way a forest confuses a man from the plains. We used the canals. We ambushed them from canoes. We collapsed the bridges behind them and stranded them in neighborhoods they did not know. We pulled them into the water, where their metal became weight instead of armor. And weight in water is death. For a while, the canal saved us. For a while, the water fought for us. And then the strangers learned. They built boats, long flat boats with high sides and platforms for their thunder weapons. They put the boats in the canals, and the boats moved through our city the way the disease had moved through our bodies, slowly, methodically, destroying everything they touched. And they filled in the canals. That is the thing I cannot forgive. More than the killing, more than the burning, more than the temples and the gods and the gold they melted down and poured into bars and shipped across the sea. They filled in the canals with rubble, with the stones of our own houses, with the bricks of our own walls. They tore the city down and used the pieces to fill the canals, so that the water could not fight for us anymore. so that the horses could walk where the canoes had floated, so that the dry landmen could turn our water city into a land city and make it theirs. They took our water, the way they took our causeways, the way they took our aqueducts, the way they took everything that made us us. They took the water, and a city without water is not a city. It is a corpse. Tito. The smell. I have to tell you about the smell, because the smell was the siege, the way the darkness was Pompeii, the way the cold was the Titanic. You do not forget the smell. You cannot. It lived in the walls, in the clothes, in the skin, in the hair, the smell of bodies, of burning, of waste, of the canals that were no longer canals but open graves, of a city rotting from the inside. I tied a cloth around my face, soaked in the juice of limes. It did not help. The smell was stronger than limes. The smell was stronger than anything. Atlacoia stopped eating on the bad days, not because there was no food, though there was almost none, but because the smell took the hunger away. The smell replaced the hunger with something worse, a nausea that lived in the base of the throat and would not leave. She got thin. My daughter, my weaver, the girl with her father's hands. She got thin the way my mother had gotten thin in Constantinople, the way Hadassah had gotten thin on Masada, the way mothers and daughters and wives get thin in every siege in every century, not by choice, not by illness, but by subtraction, by the slow, patient, relentless subtraction of everything the body needs. I watched her cheekbones come forward. I watched her wrists become branches. I watched the hands that had woven cloth so fine that women shook their heads. I watched those hands become the hands of an old woman, thin, veined, trembling. She was 11 years old, and the siege was making her ancient. There were nights when the fighting stopped and the city was quiet, and the only sound was the water that was still there, the water that had not yet been filled in, the water that lapped against the stone walls of the houses in a rhythm that had not changed in 200 years. On those nights, I sat with Atlacoia on the roof of our house, and we looked at the sky. The sky was the one thing they could not take. The stars were the same stars. The moon was the same moon. The constellations my mother had taught me, the scorpion, the fire drill, the Mamalhuastli, they were still there, still turning, still marking the passage of time in the old way, the way before the strangers, the way that did not require metal or horses or thunder. I pointed them out to Atlacoia. There, I said, the fire drill. You see the 3 stars in a line? Yes. My mother showed me those stars when I was your age, and her mother showed her, and her mother before that, all the way back to the first woman who looked up. Atlacoia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Will someone show them to my daughter?" I closed my eyes, because the question was too large, because the answer I wanted to give, yes, of course, always, the stars will always be shown. That answer was not mine to give. That answer belonged to the future. And the future was not something I owned anymore. The future was being taken from us, the way the causeways were being taken, the way the canals were being filled, stone by stone, piece by piece. But I said yes. I said, yes. Someone will show them to your daughter, and your daughter will show them to hers. Because mothers lie, and sometimes the lie is the truest thing you can say. The market closed. Tlatelolco. The great market. 60,000 people on a normal day. It closed. Not with an announcement. not with a sign on the gate. It closed the way a body closes, organ by organ, function by function, until the last stall was empty and the last merchant was gone. In the space that had been the loudest place in the world was silent. I walked through it once, near the end, through the empty stalls, the bare tables, the places where the feather sellers had been, where the cocoa sellers had been, where I had stood with my flowers for 15 years. Nothing. Dust. Silence. The occasional dog, nosing through the rubble, looking for scraps that did not exist. I stood in my place, the place where I had always stood, between the cocoa seller and the woman who sold chili peppers. I stood there and I held my hands at my sides, and I felt the absence of the flowers, the weight of them, the smell of them, the color of them. I felt their absence the way you feel the absence of a hand that has been amputated, a phantom weight, a phantom color, the ghost of orange and gold, the thirst. The thirst was the siege. Everything else, the fighting, the fire, the thunder weapons, the arrows, the screaming. Everything else was decoration. The thirst was the thing. The thirst was the enemy that lived inside the walls, inside the city, inside every throat and every tongue, and every pair of cracked, bleeding lips. We drank the lake water because there was nothing else. We boiled it. We filtered it through cloth. We prayed over it. We drank it anyway, and it made us sick. And the sickness on top of the sickness, on top of the thirst, was a weight that crushed us flatter every day. I watched my children drink salt water. That sentence. I want you to sit with that sentence. I want you to feel it the way I felt it. The way a mother feels it when she holds a cup of water to her child's lips. And the water is bad. And she knows it is bad. And she gives it to them anyway, because the alternative is no water. And no water is death. And bad water is only maybe death. And a mother will choose maybe over certain every time, every single time, without hesitation. I gave my children bad water, and I watched them drink it. And I said, drink slowly. It will be all right. It would not be all right. But mothers lie. Mothers lie the way bakers need, instinctively, without thinking. Because the alternative is letting your child see the truth, and the truth is too heavy for a child to carry, and so you carry it for them. And the carrying is a kind of love, and the love is the only thing you have left that the siege cannot take. Quottly fought on the causeway. My son, 15 years old, training to be a warrior. Now a warrior, now not training. He went out every morning with his shield and his obsidian sword, and he came back every evening with blood on his arms and dust on his face, and a look in his eyes that was not the look of a boy anymore. The look was older than him. The look was the look of someone who has seen what a thunder weapon does to a man standing beside you, what a metal sword does to an obsidian shield, what a horse does to a line of warriors who have never seen a horse. He did not talk about what he saw. He came home. He ate whatever there was to eat, and there was less every day. The maize running out, the chinampas burning, the market empty. He ate. He drank the bad water. He lay down on his mat. And in the morning, he went out again. I wanted to stop him. Every morning. I wanted to hold him the way I had held him when he was small, when he was at Lakoya's size, when he fit in my arms and the world was something I could keep away from him with my body. He did not fit in my arms anymore. He was taller than me. He was taller than his father had been. He was becoming a man, and the war was the forge, and the forge does not care whether the metal is ready. The temples burned. I saw the great temple, the Templo Mayor, the twin pyramids, the center of the center. I saw it burning. The strangers reached it on one of the bad days, the days when the causeways were lost and the fighting was in the streets, in the canals, house by house, wall by wall. They climbed the steps that the priests had climbed, the steps that the warriors had climbed, the steps where the flowers I had sold, my flowers, my marigolds, my dahlias, had been carried up in baskets and laid at the feet of the gods. The strangers climbed those steps, and at the top, they tore down the idols. I watched from across the plaza, from behind a wall, with Atlacoya pressed against my side and my hand over her mouth so she would not cry out. I watched the gods fall, the stone faces, the painted eyes, the feathered headdresses, falling, tumbling down the steps they had been carried up, breaking, shattering. The sound of a god breaking on stone is not a loud sound. It is a quiet sound, a dry, flat, final sound, like a door closing, like a world ending, not with a roar, with a click. The food ran out before the water did. That is the order. First the food, then the water, then the hope. We ate what was left, the last of the maize, the last of the beans, the leather of sandals soaked and boiled until it was soft enough to chew. Then the things I will not name. The things people eat when there is nothing left to eat and the body refuses to die, and the mind has gone past the point where dignity matters. I fed my children. I did not eat. The same arithmetic, the same equation every mother has solved since the beginning of hunger. There is not enough. There is only enough for them. The mother subtracts herself. I subtracted myself, day by day, pound by pound, until I was mostly bone and stubbornness, and the will to see my children through to whatever was on the other side of the siege. Atlacoya stopped weaving. That was how I knew she had gone past a line. She had woven every day of her life since she was old enough to hold the shuttle. Every day, rain and sun and festival and famine. Her hands knew the loom the way my hands knew flowers, the way Itzcoatl's hands had known stone, and she stopped. She sat on the mat with the loom in front of her and her hands in her lap, and she looked at the threads, and she did not move. I sat beside her. "Why have you stopped?" I said. She did not answer for a long time. Then she said, "Who will wear it?" 3 words. Who will wear it? The most devastating question a weaver can ask. The question that means, what is the point of making something beautiful when the world that would wear it is being taken apart? I did not have an answer. I put my arm around her, and we sat there, the loom between us, the threads waiting. The last day, the 13th of August, the year 3 house, the day the strangers count as the day they won. I do not count it as the day they won. I count it as the day we stopped. There is a difference. Winning is something you do. Stopping is something that is done to you. We did not lose. We were broken. The way a wall is broken, the way a bone is broken, not by choice, by force, by weight, by the accumulated pressure of 80 days of thirst and hunger and sickness and metal and thunder, and the patient, methodical, stone by stone dismantling of everything we had built. They did not conquer us. They erased us. The last morning, there was no water, not even the salt water, not even the bad water from the lake. The wells were dry. The rain barrels were empty. The canals, the ones that had not been filled in, were choked with rubble and ash, and the things I will not name. I held Atlacoya's hand. Her hand was dry, papery, the hand of an old woman on the wrist of a child. "Mama," she said, "I am thirsty." 2 words, the simplest words in any language. I am thirsty. And I had nothing to give her. I had given her everything. My food, my water, my strength, the flesh off my own bones, subtracted day by day. I had given her everything a mother has to give. And it was not enough. It is never enough. That is the truth no one tells you about motherhood. That you will give everything, every drop, every crumb, every breath. And it will not be enough. Because the world is larger than a mother. Because the siege is larger than love. Because the thirst of a child is a hole that no human hand can fill when the aqueducts have been cut and the rain will not come and the strangers are at the gates. I held her hand and I said, "Soon. We will find water soon." The lie. The mother's lie. The oldest lie in the world. The Tlatoani was captured. Cuauhtémoc, the young eagle, the last ruler, the man who had taken over when Moctezuma fell, killed by his own people, some say, killed by the strangers, others say, killed by the impossibility of being a man caught between 2 worlds with no ground under either foot. Cuauhtémoc had fought 80 days, on the causeways and in the canals and on the rooftops and in the streets. He had fought with everything the city had left, which was almost nothing, which was less than nothing, which was the will of a man who refuses to believe that the center can fall. They captured him in a canoe, trying to escape across the lake, with his family, with his council. A canoe. The last ruler of the greatest city in the world, in a canoe, on a lake that had once been his, paddling toward a shore that was no longer his. And the strangers caught him, and the strangers brought him back, and the strangers made him kneel. I did not see this. I heard about it. I heard about it the way you hear about the death of a god. Not with surprise. With the slow, terrible confirmation of something you had already known, but had not yet been willing to say aloud. The center had fallen. The center could fall. The center had always been able to fall. We just hadn't known it, because we were the center, and the center cannot see itself from the outside. The center can only see outward, and outward for 200 years had been nothing but the world we ruled, until the world sent something back. The last thing I saw from the canoe as we left the city that was no longer a city, the city that was smoke and rubble and silence, and the bodies of people I had known floating in the canals that had been our streets. The last thing I saw was a chinampa, one of the floating gardens, still there, still floating, still green. The flowers were still on it. My flowers, marigolds, orange and gold, the flowers I had grown with my hands, the flowers I had carried to market on my back, the flowers I had sold to mothers and priests and lovers, still there, still blooming, on a floating garden, in a burning city, on a lake that was red with blood. The flowers did not know. The flowers did not know that the city was dying, that the temples were broken, that the gods had fallen, that the people who had planted them and tended them and loved them were being led away in chains. The flowers just bloomed, because that is what flowers do. They bloom, regardless. Cuauhtli died in the fighting on the last day. I did not see him die, I was told, later, by a boy who had been beside him, a boy whose name I cannot remember, because the remembering is too crowded, because there are too many names and not enough room, and some of the names have fallen out of me the way stones fall out of a broken wall. The boy said Cuauhtli fought until the end, that he did not retreat, that he stood on the causeway with his shield broken and his sword in his hand, and he faced the metal men on their giant deer, and he did not step back. I believe this. I believe it because he was his father's son, and his father did not step back from stone, and his mother did not step back from flowers, and stepping back was not a thing our family did. He was 15 years old. Atlacoya and I survived. That is the word they use. Survived. As though surviving were a thing you do. As though it required effort or skill or courage. It did not. It required only the failure to die. We failed to die. That is all. We were in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place, depending on who is telling the story and what they think right means. We were taken, with the others, the women and the children, led off the island, down the causeway, the broken causeway, the causeway that the strangers had rebuilt to carry their army in, and now used to carry us out. I walked down the causeway with my daughter beside me. I did not look back, not because I was brave, because I could not, because looking back would have meant seeing the last of it, the smoke, the ruins, the water that was no longer blue but gray with ash and red with blood. I could not see that and keep walking, so I looked forward, at the shore, at the mountains, at the land that had always been there, patient, green, waiting, beyond the lake and the city and the war. I looked forward, and I kept walking. I am old now, very old. I live in a place that is not my city, because my city does not exist. The strangers built their city on top of it, stone by stone, church on top of temple, street on top of canal, square on top of plaza. They filled in the lake, they drained the water, and filled it with earth, and built on top of it. And the city they built is large and loud and full of people, who walk on streets that were once canals and sleep in houses that stand where gardens floated. They do not know. They do not know what is beneath them. They do not know that under the cathedral there are pyramid stones, that under the plaza there are offerings of jade and obsidian, that under the streets there are canals that still hold water, dark and still, the water that remembers even if the people above it do not. Sometimes the earth reminds them. When they dig, when they build, when they push a shovel into the ground to lay a pipe or a foundation, and the shovel hits stone, and the stone is carved, and the carving is a serpent or an eagle or the face of a god they do not recognize, they find us, piece by piece, stone by stone, offering by offering. They found the great stone of the moon goddess, buried under the corner of a street. 8 tons of carved basalt, the goddess with her dismembered limbs and her serpent skirt and her skull necklace, a goddess of endings, a goddess who understood that everything that is built will be unbuilt. She was under a street. For 300 years, people walked over her, carts rolled over her, children played over her, and she lay there, in the dark, in the earth, waiting. She is in a museum now, behind glass, like the plaster casts of Pompeii, like everything beautiful that the world has tried to bury, behind glass, as though glass could hold a goddess, as though anything could. I went back once, not to the city is gone, but to the place where the city was. I stood in the great plaza, the Zocalo, they call it now, and I looked at the ground, at the paving stones, at the cathedral on one side and the government palace on the other, and the flag in the center, the flag of the country that was built on top of my country. And I closed my eyes, and I listened, and under the traffic, under the voices, under the horns and the engines and the music from the street vendors, under all of it. I heard water, faint, almost imagined, a whisper, a murmur, the sound of a canal that was filled in 500 years ago, but that still moves somewhere down there, under the concrete, under the asphalt, under the layers and layers of everything that's been built on top of us. The water still moves. The water remembers. The water will always remember. Because water does not forget. Water does not forgive. Water does not accept the concrete and the asphalt and the cathedral. Water waits. Water finds the cracks. Water works its way through the stone the way memory works its way through forgetting. And one day, the water will rise, and the old city will show its face again, and the flowers will bloom on the lake, and the canoes will float on the canals, and the market will open, and a woman will stand in her place between the cocoa seller and the chili pepper seller, and she will hold out her hands, and her hands will be full of marigolds, and she will call out in a voice that the morning has been waiting for. Flowers, flowers. Who wants flowers? Atlacoia lived. She married. She had children. She wove. She wove until her hands were too old to hold the shuttle. And then she taught her granddaughter, and the granddaughter taught her daughter. And the patterns that women in the market had held up to the light and shaken their heads over, the patterns survived. Not on cloth. Cloth rots. Cloth burns. Cloth is taken. In the hands. The patterns survived in the hands. In the muscle memory. In the way a wrist turns and a finger lifts and a thread crosses a thread in a sequence that has no written record, but lives in the body, the way a song lives in the throat. The strangers took the city. They did not take the weaving. I say their names every evening when the sun goes down, when the light turns the color of marigolds. It's Codal, my husband, who carved stone serpents that seemed to breathe, who was taken by a sickness from another world. Quautli, my son, who was 15, who did not step back. Atlacoia, my daughter, who asked the only question that matters, who will wear it, and then kept weaving anyway. The woman who sold cocoa beside me, whose voice was cacao, 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 whose silence was the loudest sound in the market, the priests who carried my flowers up the steps, the warriors who wore my flowers into battle. Because even warriors want beauty. Even men going to die want something that smells like morning. The chinampa, the floating garden, the green raft on the water, the flowers that kept blooming. In the burning city, on the red lake, the canals, the causeways, the lake, the city on the water, the city that is under the city that the water remembers. I was a flower seller. I grew things every morning, before the sun, in the dark, with mud on my hands and lake water on my knees, and the smell of marigolds in my hair. I grew flowers, and I brought them to a market, and the market is gone, and the flowers are gone, and the chinampas are under concrete, but the seeds are not gone. Seeds are patient. Seeds are small. Seeds travel in the wind, in the fur of animals, in the pockets of children, in the hems of skirts. Seeds do not care about borders or empires or the names of conquerors. Seeds go where seeds go. And when they land, they grow. And when they grow, they bloom. And when they bloom, they are the same flowers that bloomed on the chinampas 500 years ago. The same orange, the same gold, the same sharp peppery smell that the wind carries across the valley and into the houses and through the windows and into the lungs of people who do not know they are breathing history. But they are. Every breath of marigold is a breath of the old city. Every petal is a piece of the floating garden. Every seed is a letter from the dead to the living, a letter that says, "We were here. We grew things. We made beauty on a lake, and the beauty is still growing." I want you to do something for me. I want you to find a marigold. It does not matter where. A garden, a market, a roadside, a cemetery gate. Find one. Hold it. Press it to your face. Breathe in. And when you breathe in, when the sharp, bright gold of it fills your lungs, know that you are breathing the same scent that filled a city on a lake, that a woman carried on her back to a market of 60,000, that priests held up to the sun on the steps of a temple, that a girl of 11 touched with one careful finger the way she touched quetzal feathers, that a mother brought to her husband's grave. Breathe it in and remember. But the flowers are not gone. They bloom here still, in this new world that was built on top of my old one, in the markets of the city that replaced my city, in the cemeteries on the Day of the Dead, when the living cover the graves with marigolds and the graves turn orange and gold, the color of my flowers, the color of the sun, the color of everything I loved. They call them cempasúchil, the flower of the dead, the flower that guides the spirits home. That is what my flowers became. Not decoration, not commerce, not beauty for its own sake. A road between the living and the dead. A road made of petals. Every year, in the month the strangers call November, the living remember the dead. They clean the graves. They bring food, the food the dead loved, the food that the dead ate in the life before the dying. Tamales and chocolate and bread, sweet bread, bread shaped like bones, bread that the bakers make in the dark before dawn, the way bakers have always made bread, the way the baker in Pompeii made bread, push, fold, turn, and they bring flowers, my flowers, marigolds, armfuls of them, buckets of them, carpets of them, laid across the graves, across the altars, across the roads from the cemetery to the house, so that the dead can follow the color home. Because the dead need a road, because the dead have been gone a long time and they have forgotten the way. And the color of the road is orange, and the color of the road is gold, and the smell of the road is the sharp, bright, peppery smell of marigold, the smell that I woke up to every morning on the Chinampa, the smell that I carried on my hands and in my hair and in the creases of my elbows, the smell of home, the road home. And every year, on the night of the dead, the road opens, and the spirits walk it, and the marigolds light the way, and the dead come home. I come home, through the flowers, through the petals, through the color that the strangers could not take because you cannot conquer a color. You cannot put a chain on orange. You cannot build a church on top of gold. You cannot kill a flower. You can cut it. You can burn it. You can pave over the garden where it grew. You can drain the lake and fill the canals and tear down the temples and melt the gold and rename the streets and rewrite the histories and teach the children a new language and a new God and a new way of counting the years. You can do all of that. And in November, the marigolds will bloom in the markets, in the cemeteries, in the gardens of the houses that stand where the chinampas floated. The marigolds will bloom because flowers do not know about conquest. Flowers do not know about empires. Flowers know about sun and water and soil, and the soil remembers. Even when the people forget, the soil remembers. The flowers survive. The flowers always survive. Remember us. Remember us. remember us.